So what happens when a series of horrific crimes are so tightly connected that the law has to treat them as one single monstrous act? Well, today we're going to unpack a really powerful Supreme Court decision that answers that exact question. It's a case that grew out of a 5-month ordeal that all started with a terrifying threat.
Just listen to those words. These are the chilling words that kicked off everything for a 15-year-old girl who, for her privacy, we're just going to call AA. To really get a handle on this complex case, we're going to walk through it just like a legal digest. We'll start with the facts of the crime, then look at the defense's arguments. After that, we'll cover the verdict, the court's reasoning, the major legal precedent it set, and, finally, the sentence that was handed down.
Okay, so first up, let's lay out the facts. This is the harrowing story of what happened, based directly on the victim's own testimony in court.
This timeline really just lays out the terrifying sequence of events. It all starts on July 1st, 1994. AA is abducted, and that same night, she's assaulted. The very next day, she's taken to another house and held captive. And this wasn't just for a few days. We're talking about 5 long months of detention, which only ended with her rescue that December.
You have to understand, her captivity wasn't just about being locked in a room. It was enforced by constant psychological terror. The court records show she was guarded 24/7, and she and her family were living under constant, credible death threats. There was really no way for her to escape or get help.
Now, when you're faced with testimony that's this harrowing, what does a defense attorney do? Well, in this case, they tried to create doubt by focusing on 2 key questions for the court.
First, the defense honed in on the timeline. They argued, hey, why did her mother wait a whole 5 months to go to the police? They claim that kind of delay just doesn't make sense if the story of abduction and rape was true. It seemed inconsistent to them.
But, and this is a huge but, the court found a very compelling reason for that delay. The victim's mother testified that one of the accused, Madsali, directly threatened to kill her daughter if she went to the authorities. And get this, when she finally did report it, he actually tried to make good on that threat and shot at her. So the court concluded that the silence was caused by fear, not falsehood.
The second argument from the defense was a real curveball, a really emotional one. The victim's own father, who we'll call CCC, actually testified for the defense. He got on the stand and claimed there was no abduction, that his daughter married the man voluntarily after a 3-year courtship.
The court, however, completely dismantled this testimony. It turned out the father had abandoned the family way back in 1983, more than 10 years earlier. His story was called self-serving and was flat-out contradicted by everyone else, the victim, her mother, and even the imam who was forced to perform the sham marriage. He simply wasn't a credible witness.
Okay, so with the defense's main arguments pretty much in tatters, let's move on to the actual verdict that the courts delivered.
This was not a close call in the lower courts. Both the regional trial court and the Court of Appeals found the accused guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. They both agreed that the victim's testimony was clear, consistent, and totally believable.
But this is where the case gets really fascinating from a legal perspective. The Supreme Court didn't just uphold the conviction. They went a step further to clarify the exact nature of the crimes here. This is what lawyers call the ratio decidendi. It's the core legal reason, the why, behind the final judgment. So the court went back to the law books, specifically to Article 267 of the Revised Penal Code, which covers kidnapping and serious illegal detention. They laid out these 4 essential elements, almost like a checklist, and in this case, every single box was ticked. The offenders were private individuals, they illegally detained someone, and the aggravating circumstances were all there. The victim was female, a minor, the detention lasted over 3 days, and they made death threats. The justices also had some pretty strong words for the defense's other claims. They totally rejected the sweetheart theory as a complete fabrication. And the idea that a young woman would make all this up over a dowry dispute, they called that excuse too lame to be accepted as true.
And all of this reasoning leads us to the most important part of this ruling, where the court clarifies a really critical legal doctrine that has major implications. You see, the court found that this wasn't just a case of kidnapping and a case of rape. No, it was something different, a special complex crime. This is a legal concept where 2 or more crimes are so fundamentally intertwined that the law just treats them as one single, indivisible, and much more serious offense.
And the court's own words here are crystal clear.
They basically say that if the rape happens during the kidnapping, as a direct result of it, you can't treat them as two separate crimes anymore. Instead, the law fuses them together into this one aggravated offense, kidnapping with rape, which carries a single, very severe penalty.
All right, so with that crucial legal principle established, let's look at the final disposition of the case. What were the actual penalties that the Supreme Court handed down? Okay, so here's the final breakdown. For that special complex crime, kidnapping with rape, Sajiran and his father Mayoran both got reclusion perpetua. That's essentially a life sentence, and it's without the possibility of parole. Then, Sajiran got a second life sentence for the separate crime of serious illegal detention. And as for Madsali, his conviction was upheld, but it became final after he managed to escape from custody.
So, the real takeaway here is more than just the tragic story of a crime. It's a deep dive into how our justice system works. It really forces us to think about this question. When does a chain of criminal acts become so connected that they merge into a single, even more heinous offense? And in this case, Madsali v. People, the law gives a very clear and powerful answer.